Hey everyone, welcome back to Cultivate Talk. In this episode, I'm joined by Macy Dunklin, a writing center professional and doctoral candidate in communication at Texas A&M University. Macy's work sits at a really fascinating intersection: writing centers, sex education, stigma, and community literacy. In our conversation, we explore how two areas that might seem very different, writing and sexuality, are actually connected by the assumptions, taboos, and communication challenges that surround them. Macy shares insights from their research on sex toy stores in the Bible Belt as unexpected educational spaces, the role of queer theory in understanding community, and what it takes to create supportive, stigma-free environments for learning. We also talk about how communication skills transfer across spaces, from helping students find their voice in writing to helping people feel confident in exploring their own sexuality. It's a thoughtful, candid conversation that reminds us just how much communication shapes learning, belonging, and confidence. Let's get into it. Macy Dunklin is a writing center professional and doctoral candidate in communication at Texas A&M University. Their research spans across multiple fields of study such as stigma studies, organizational communication, writing studies, and queer theory. Connecting these topics is a passion for investigating stigma as an actor in education and the impact of community literacy initiatives. Their previous work has used qualitative methods like ethnography, interviews, and grounded theory, as well as data and textual analysis. Overall, Macy's goal is to help others feel confident in seeking help and sustaining spaces for educational support. So thank you so much for being here today, Macy. I really appreciate it, and I am super excited to talk to you. So before we really get into it, I kind of just want to know a little bit more about you. So you work in two very different but surprisingly connected spaces: writing centers and sex education. Can you walk us through how these two areas became your focus?
There are two things that have kind of stayed with me throughout my adult life, I'll say. That's when I started college, I did not have the most traditional route. I did 1 year, one semester actually of college, saw the bill and said, not for me. Went home, tried to figure out what I was going to do, went to community college for a bit, and I had an experience that I think a lot of people share where my friends and I were trying to figure out something to do at night, and we said, ooh, let's go to a sex shop. So we drove around town and found one that was open, and while we were in there, they were acting all crazy, typical college girls at a sex shop giggling at everything, picking up the penis pops. But I was really attracted to the bookshelf because I'm a nerd. And I couldn't believe everything that was there, and that they could have there because I grew up in North Carolina, which is part of the Bible Belt. It's very southern. Very conservative where I was. And so I was talking to the shop owner about the different books and also everything that was in there. And some of my family is in law, so I had some questions about how they even existed. And by the time we left, the owner actually handed me an application and said, "We're always hiring. Would you like to work here?" They didn't realize that I was only 19. Not many places hire people that young, but I ended up taking the job. And as I decided to pursue a college education, it worked really well with my shifts that I would kind of go to class all day and then go work at the sex store from, 6 p.m. to 1 in the morning. And on weekdays, not many visitors. So I do most of my homework in the sex store study hall is usually what I called it. And then at the same time, when I was in my master's program, I ended up getting an assistantship, which only paid my tuition. So I still worked at the sex shop in the evenings, but my assistantship was at a writing center. And I absolutely fell in love with the work. I wish I'd known about it in undergrad, but as a non traditional student who wasn't on campus and was always part time, I never really encountered these resources, which is why I also became very passionate about outreach of student services. But I've always been interested in teaching. I've always liked working with others, being in leadership positions. And I found that the writing center relationship of one-to-one peer mentoring, recognizing that we both had something to offer each other, just really vibed with me and kind of fit what I was doing in the sex toy store as well, where I was seen as this kind of person that just knew a little bit more than the other people coming in and could provide some education and guidance. And as I kept on with my career, I would do some teaching, miss writing centers and go back, do teaching again, and then miss writing centers. And so now I'm
Yeah.
just sticking with the writing centers.
That is a fascinating connection, though. And on the surface, people probably don't truly understand how connected they are because
No.
when we think about sex education, we might not necessarily think about resources like
Hmm.
books and things that have been written and are continuously written in regard to it. So,
Yes.
one of my favorite things that you have said is that people assume adults already know how to write and how to have sex, but we rarely receive education on either. Why do you think those assumptions are so persistent?
Oh, you gave me this question ahead of time, and I still was like, oh, how do I answer this succinctly without going on some kind of large ramble? Specifically with sex, there's this idea of it being biological and it's natural that we want to reproduce. So there's this idea that everyone already knows how to do it, even though we're not allowed to talk about it or think about it until a certain point. And then because it's been made so private, a lot of people don't talk to each other about it or think they're allowed to talk about what's not going well with it because then they can't do this natural thing correctly. I think that's kind of where there's this shared understanding with writing that you've been writing the whole time you've been in school. You received training in elementary school, middle school, high school. And so you're just supposed to know how to do it because we write all the time, especially now more than even 20 years ago where people are texting, they're emailing. And so people go, I should just know how to do this. Why don't I know? Writing is tied to our language learning, which feels very innate and natural that it happens. And so there's these two things that we're supposed to just kind of know how to do, but no one really tells you how to do them. You're just supposed to do them. Even at the graduate level, I had a master's in English, which was very text based. And then I came into communication in a research program. And I looked at my professor and said, I've never written a methods section. I don't know what that is. I don't know how to do that. And they were like, you didn't learn in your previous program? And I said, no. And they said, you didn't learn in undergrad? I said, no. And then you can't say you learned that in high school. And people just always do this backtracking that you should have learned
Yeah.
then, you should have learned then, you should have learned then, which builds up this feeling that people think I should already know this. I shouldn't have to talk about it or seek help for it.
Right. And it's probably a point of conflict when we think about like, oh, you should have learned this at this point in
Hmm.
your life. But then at that point in your life, maybe that education wasn't the best it could be, or the resources you were given were not the best that those could be. Like I know this comes up a lot in my health communication classes when we start
Hmm.
talking about sex education and resources and how they're communicated to people starting at the age that like sex education begins at. One, my students can never like truly make it through an entire lecture without
Yeah.
bottling up a little bit or feeling a little embarrassed, even though I try really hard to make it such like a safe environment.
Hmm.
But it's really interesting and I can relate to their experiences, like hearing what they took and how little they took from sex education when it first began while they were growing up and in school. And it's like, well, if that's what you're relying on for people to just know and be taught at that age and
Hmm.
carry that with them through life, that's really concerning. And then you think about everything else that they learn through a friend of a friend or through a friend or
Yeah.
other messages that they see online or social media. And so it's always this really fascinating point to me of like when we start sex education, the disservice that we're doing to individuals
Hmm.
in terms of like setting them on a path of confidence or at least being able to seek out credible resources that can help them
Yes.
and their overall health down the line.
Yeah, I think that lack of being able to understand where to go for things. Like there's just, in my opinion, an informational literacy crisis happening in general, and writing and campus services and sex education are just getting tied up in that too. That
Yeah.
especially with things like one of my students was actually just talking about this, that because Instagram and all of these things feed you exactly what you want and you're looking for without searching, that students are struggling to figure out how to search for things on their own. They're losing those skills because everything's just kind of made ready present for them. And that transfers over into these other areas where now you have something that's not readily available to you. How do you discern how to find that? And if what you're looking at is even a credible source? And if
It's
you're already experiencing that and just your basic things you're trying to figure out, what happens when you add that embarrassment or secrecy of
yeah.
trying to find something that's even more difficult?
Absolutely, which I think is a great segue into my next question, was that your dissertation explores how sex toy shops in the Bible Belt act as educational spaces in the absence of formal sex ed. What
Hmm.
inspired this focus? Was it your personal upbringing in the Bible Belt?
Yes, and my experience working in sex toy stores in
Yeah,
the Bible Belt, kind of like you touched on, I never had a lecture on sex education because it was abstinence only education, but
right.
I had I guess now that I think about it, it's very radical, but our church had a little thing for girls, and we were shown how tampons and pads worked, and that was the extent of sex education, which is great that people recognize that it's not just penetrative sex that needs to be talked about in sex education, but
Right.
that's all I had. And as you get more and more generations of that, you then have so many adults out there that don't understand what's going on with their bodies, or what is okay, what is safe, what's pleasure, what's not. And so, being in these sex toy stores, I was experiencing my own kind of revelation, sorry, of what sex education was and what I needed to learn just by what I was interacting with. But I was always having customers come in and almost use us as these moments of learning where they'd ask us questions about pleasure, feeling like these kinds of questions that weren't just this hurts are the questions to be asked outside of the doctor's office. Like your doctor isn't for how do I make this more fun or pleasurable.
Right.
And so we end up filling that gap for them. But I also knew from my side that the education at our store, at least, that employees got was self motivated. So we were trained on different products, and a lot of sex toy companies have people who come in and talk to you about your toys. But for us, a lot of it was on our own time to kind of be interested and look into more stuff and then share it with customers. So I knew it wasn't this most reliable avenue, but I was also recognizing that lots of sex education discussions are about children because we like the factor of children and what it draws attention wise. But now there's all of these people who aren't children anymore who did not get any sex education outside of spaces where people mandatorily have to meet. How do we get them information? And a
Yeah.
lot of times I think that's you've got to meet them when they're seeking it. We can't just kind of give someone something they don't want, which to me factors into children's education as well. Like I probably did learn how to do a methods section at some point, but I was a really tired undergrad student working till 1 in the morning, and I probably didn't pay attention until I needed to know how to write one. So why
Right.
not meet people in the sex toy store when they're asking these questions and give them the information they need when they want it so they'll hopefully remember it better.
Yeah, and that's so well said, and it seems like common sense in a way
Yeah.
that we probably don't really think about very often.
Hmm.
So, what are some of the unique communication challenges these stores face in such a stigmatized context?
Well, my first question would be, what do you mean by unique? Like unique as a sex, like related to sex or as a business compared to other businesses?
We do both. Both sound
Okay.
really fascinating.
Yeah. So, because as a business, there are some challenges they're facing that aren't just unique to them, that a lot of these stores are independent businesses, which is just a sector that's really struggling right now,
Right.
especially during COVID. I've been working on my degree through COVID. And so I've done some studies that didn't get published because they were just for class with stores that once I got to my dissertation, they closed because they didn't make it through COVID, or they switched to an only online environment, which is great. There's a lot of people that want the privacy of their home to seek this information, but there's
Yeah.
also people who have no technological literacy to figure that out and need these brick and mortar spaces. So space is also an issue. There's a lot of literature on the zoning of what I call sexually oriented businesses. So businesses that are oriented towards sexual activity, that they're associated with crime, even though the literature recently proves that's not true. They just have to be in high crime areas usually. I
Right.
think her first name's Emily, but I know it's Eckert. Eckert has published a lot from the law policy side about zoning and sex toy stores and strip clubs and other bathhouses and stuff. So zoning is a huge issue that sexually stigmatized businesses specifically face. And even
Right.
here in College Station, you'll find little squares of land that say they are a park because once they're a park, they're designated as public spaces. And that's a way that neighborhoods can control who can or can't be in the area because certain businesses cannot be near these places. Um,
Fascinating.
yeah, there's also the religious element,
Yeah.
which gets tied heavily into morality because a lot of people's moral base comes from their religion, and then we use moral as a way to regulate law. And so in the Bible Belt, there's a lot of just people don't even want it to be there. They don't want it to discuss. They don't want it to exist. They'll seek these spaces out just to protest them. We see that a lot with places like Planned Parenthood, where they might be far out of town and people still go after them. But also, these are retail stores. So they deal with another issue that's not completely unique, which is turnover. And how do you train employees for a rather unique job that needs a certain kind of sensitivity in the customer service aspect to be able to get people to open up about what they're interested in and what they want when you might have people that stay for 6 months or 1 year. And it kind of reminds me of the teaching personality where a lot of the people I talk to that have been in these stores a while, it's that they have a personal motivation to care about their community and to want to educate people on this. But not everyone who applies to work in the sex toy store is going to have that drive. There's, of course, always people who just think it's a fun place to be, which
Yeah.
granted, I was one of those people. I was like, oh, what a cool job to have on my resume. But also, it paid really well because there's
Yeah.
dangers associated with it. We never had anyone who was femme presenting work by themselves at night because of the zoning issues. We were in some areas where you weren't sure who might be coming in late at night, what kind of pressures they might put on people, which then just kind of plays into itself because then people can say that things are happening at those stores.
Yeah.
So like I feel like I kind of went on the business route, but those are a lot of the challenges that these stores face, but also that one of the stores unique to the sex education aspect is often like education in general. To me, education is usually a care labor, even though a lot of people get paid for it. And so it's not always bringing in a lot of money for these stores and trying to rationalize with themselves, continuing to do these resources. How do we get this information in a way that still supports our profits and what money we need to get out there? So sometimes it can almost come off to customers as money grabby. Some of the ways they might do it, like we're going to go to this event and like offer discount stuff, but we're hoping we talk to you about some sex education things. And people are like, why can't it be free? And they say,
Yeah.
well, we're an independent business. Unfortunately, we have to pay the person who comes in for this. So
Yeah.
balancing how much they can put into it when it comes to also how much are they getting out of it just to keep their business going ends up being a conflict they have to face. And that's advertising. So then they have this increased visibility. And there's a big divide in the stores that I looked at for my dissertation of those who really want to be out there and see their presence as part of
Yeah.
fighting the stigma, and those that recognize the stigma still of being in a conservative area and want those people to be able to come in so they kind of comply with the stigma a bit.
fascinating. The entire concept of like sex education through sex stores is fascinating. But I think it's
Yeah.
incredible that like your lived experience has played a role
Hmm.
in how you see this, especially being in the Bible Belt, but how you see this in comparison to somebody who might just read about it or talk to you about it,
Hmm.
and their minds like opened up to kind of like this pathway of sex education through sex stores. Because it makes sense in terms of like showing up when people need that information
Hmm.
versus trying to just give it to them when they have no interest or don't need it.
Yeah.
So you draw on queer theory and the communicative constitution of organizations. How do these frameworks help you understand the role these stores play in the community?
Yeah. So because I myself am queer, I just
Yeah.
always feel like anything I'm doing is queer in a sense, which some queer scholars might go, no, don't say that. But that's just how like I see the world through a queer lens. Like
Yeah.
there are not binaries to me. I try not to use words like binary and duality in what I work in. But for me personally, Jack Halberstam's Queer Art of Failure is like a personal project to me that I have experienced a fair amount of failure. That the queer experience is a lot about failure, but accepting that and recognizing that that is a strength, that there is a lot that we can learn from failure. And these stores, in a way, are sometimes failing. They're failing in their missions of sex education. They're failing in the eyes of the societal morale just based on their existence. And then with the Writing Center, we try to create a place where students can take risk and fail and still feel safe doing that.
Yeah.
So that's how the queer theory kind of weaves in. I'm still in the middle of actually drafting my literature review right now. So there is some queer organizational communication scholars that I just haven't fully crafted that section yet. So not to say that that's not out there, but they're still a little separate for me in my head. But with
Yeah.
communicative constitution of organizations, the Montreal School has this big focus on communication as relational. And to me, stigma is a relation. It's attributed through a relation, it exists through relations. And then just the literal fact that sex itself is often called relations, like having relations with someone else. And so this framing of an organization as being built through the communicative acts that make it exist, that it's collections of meaning that are agreed upon that then solidify themselves in practices, and that goes beyond just, people to people. It can also be the visuals, like the layout of the store itself communicates something to people. It can communicate the stigma when you see, like the whips and the chains in the very back of the store, or when the men's section is closed off somewhere. Like, what is that communicating about men's privacy in these spaces as well?
Oh,
So I
yeah.
really like that it has this idea that organizations are built through the communications that happen in them, and that it's also all about how these pieces relate to each other. I feel
I
like I
love
need to snip that, send that to my advisor, and be like, can
that.
I just put that? I'm good to
Yeah.
go.
There you go. Make it easy. Absolutely. You had a great idea. You articulated it super well. So just copy and paste that
Yeah.
into your dissertation. I love it. So you've worked on expanding speaking resources in your center. How has your communication training influenced that work?
Yeah. So when brain, there's a point to edit. So when I came to Texas A&M, I came here for my communication PhD. So I started in public speaking. So I
Okay.
have a lot of experience specifically in speaking resources, but I've also spent a couple of years abroad teaching in Germany and Japan
Oh, that's
with
amazing.
ESL classes. Yeah, I've done a surprising amount of things for the short time I've
Yeah.
lived. But working with ESL environments, or EFL or ELL, a lot of these always integrate speaking into them, because people in other countries often get experience writing English and listening to English, but not really activating their English through speaking, because it's a lot of classroom time.
Yeah.
So I've developed these kind of well-rounded experiences of speaking, and I've tried to apply them in our center, because even though a lot of writing centers are called writing centers. We help with all kinds of communication. And so we want to build up more of our speaking resources here. And again, a lot of people assume they know how to speak because
Yes.
they're speaking all the time. But, getting up in front of a classroom is a lot of people's top three fears of talking
So
to
true.
other people. And
Yes.
as someone who's so familiar with what students are going through in the classroom, and also that I do have this really comfortable relationship with failure and how to view it and move through it, I've tried to develop our speaking resources to be very aware of the shame that people bring to speaking situations, of the fears they might have, and how can we validate that, but also help build people up. So a lot of the resources I've worked on have been more about not like how do you develop a speech, but how do you get through your speech.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Very important work too. And it
Hmm.
is fascinating. I feel like people don't necessarily always take advantage of all of the tools their writing centers on campuses
Yeah,
have. And it is just like such an in-depth source in terms of anything communication related.
yeah.
And even just getting tips, like I teach public speaking from time to time, and for some reason, like, they'll ask me, like, well, how do you get through a speech? We have, obviously a lot of classroom time to kind of unpack that and discuss
Hmm.
that. But they go to a different person, like at a different resource, like the writing center, and kind of talk through it there. And it can just be more helpful sometimes because it's something
Yeah,
completely separate and not within the class that's able to kind of give their 2 cents and provide reassurance and provide them with resources that just resonate with students more versus that classroom environment and your teacher standing up there telling you like you'll get through it and this is how and all of that stuff. So I think it is an underutilized resource on so many
yeah.
college campuses. So the fact that you are expanding resources and doing such great work within yours is truly amazing. Like super exciting too.
Yeah, it's also nice that our center as a whole is very invested in outreach and not just kind of funneling ourselves into our own little space or just an English department. So there's a lot of support too to try and reach the students we can and thinking of unique and innovative ideas.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, when certain entities on campuses take that approach
Hmm.
with that like outreach and getting out there and communicating and forming relationships with people versus waiting for those people to come to them, I
Yeah.
think that is just like such a recipe for success. So that is super awesome to see.
Yeah, especially with first generation students, because a lot
Yes.
of them don't have experience understanding how to navigate those things, that they exist, what tutoring is even like. There's this very weird flip that happens where you're in high school, so many people get tutors to maintain A's. Then you get to college and tutoring is only for people who are failing. So it's
Right.
like a lot of people who might have already been doing really well, had access to these, might have had parents who paid for it. Then you have these people who might be struggling in college who either think they're above it now for some reason or have
Yeah.
no idea how these things work or what happens when you go into a tutoring session.
So true. Yeah, that there's absolutely a different approach in
Hmm.
college to such resources and services, and it's always like, no, please use them. They're
Yes,
here.
yeah, you
They're
pay for
here.
us.
Yeah,
So,
you pay
yeah.
for them. Like, they are here for you. Please
Yes.
use them. Absolutely. So, what kinds of assumptions or taboos show up in both of your research areas?
So I guess in the beginning, I started with the first one that everyone should already know all of this,
Yes.
which is a big one. With writing centers, there's a lot of assumptions. And I even think with sex toy stores too, that whoever you're talking to, since they're in that space, is the expert and is going to judge you. And you'll see a lot too in like the language of both these spaces, they like to call themselves judgment-free zones, to kind of articulate that like we're not here to say, haha, you don't know what a dildo is, or wow, I can't believe you used commas that way. That we want to help, we want you to be excited about what you're doing. I'm getting tired of seeing this word everywhere, but it's really about empowering people. But this idea of being judged shows up in both places a lot. And I think both places react to it in a similar way, where they try to create a very comfortable environment. Both are pretty informal, usually. Even like at our writing center, no one wears like ties and stuff. We tell our students dress how you would on campus because there's a different kind of authority to push back on someone if you look more like a teacher. And we want people to be able to say, I don't get that. I don't understand. And so also at the sex toy store I worked at, we also kind of just wore whatever we wanted. And sometimes that would backfire. A lot of men did not want to come up and talk to me because they assumed as someone who's femme presenting that I'm going to judge them for not being able to perform correctly. Same way, like if they're coming in for a resource in the store, they must be failing in some way. And then, women come up and want to ask me all the questions about everything. And there's assumptions in the sex toy store that everyone that works there has to be crazy in bed. And honestly, you get so overstimulated with everything. I'm like, cuddling with popcorn sounds great. What if we really Netflixed and chilled? And that was just it. I don't use everything in the store. I just know everything in the store. But there are also people who do, who are in there because they love it. I'm part of different communities where there is a lot of sexual activity, and I enjoy engaging with those places and trying the things that are in the store. But that's not like all I do all the time. Like both my jobs are confused when I say what my other job is. Usually they're like, how can you be in these spaces? Which we see all the time in there's a manifestation of the assumption when we see teachers who are fired for their, history as a stripper getting out or being on OnlyFans, this idea that you must be bringing all of that everywhere you go each time you're present at a space, and that you're not mature enough or, understand different boundaries or the expectations of others to not take either of these things into another space. Now with that, I do take some parts into both spaces because I see a lot of transference in the ideas of making people comfortable and customer service strategies of, trying to make your customer happy, but also trying to make sure they understand what they're getting into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So well said. You should just copy and paste that into your paper as well.
Amazing.
Super well said. Absolutely.
My conclusion's next, so I'll just start drafting after
We're going to
this.
get your dissertation done in this entire hour that we have together.
Awesome.
Yeah.
You should offer a side service. Do my podcast, finish your dissertation.
Exactly. That's hilarious. So kind of piggybacking off of that, how do you personally navigate doing research and advocacy in areas that some might find uncomfortable or off limits? Because I imagine you've probably have come face to face with that a few times in your academic journey.
Yes, I have to give a shout out to my advisor, Dr. Anna Wolf, because she already has a book out researching brothels in Nevada. And so she's given me a lot of guidance about what to expect or how to approach academics who might stigmatize what I'm doing, because sex research is still stigmatized, even though they're like the research on sex work, especially digital sex work during COVID, has really skyrocketed. But I, before this, was doing some stuff with fan studies. So I also already faced this idea of, low theory research as not being legitimate. But to me, these are spaces of everyday people doing everyday things, and it's what we need to be studying. It's not super niche, it's everywhere, which is one of my favorite things about sex, is that it's this big thing we're not supposed to talk about, but we see it all the time. Even I was in the airport the other month and saw this person, they were, kissing each other, heterosexual couple on a billboard, and the engagement ring was there, and I'm like, there it is, it's people making out, and we're talking about marriage, and it's the advertisement for this perfume. Right. So these things are everywhere, and I make those arguments, but I also get a little clever about how I talk about my research to some people, because being from the Bible Belt, I had to talk to some of my family about what I was studying. Right. Even when I was younger, when I started working in the sex toy stores, my mom wouldn't tell my family what I was doing, what my job was. So I start by telling people that my dissertation topic is about community initiatives related to health in areas that are experiencing disparities, which a lot of people in rural areas relate to with, especially here in Texas, there's some doctor flight happening. There's hospitals closing down in rural areas. So they get real excited about it. Then they ask what specifically, and I say women's health or bodily health. And they say, how does that happen? And I'm like, well, you wouldn't know this, but sex toy stores actually, and it's a fun little transition. But
Yeah.
then when I'm in spaces that are like sexual activity spaces or sex toy stores, there's a lot of people that already know everyone has sex. Everyone can be interested in it. So like I've had other teachers as coworkers before trying to make money. So I don't see any kind of shock from people in those communities, but I do see shock from customers. Whenever I'm back working in a store, I'll never forget one person who said, I can't believe you have a master's degree and you're working here. And that was a conversation instead to talk about how underpaid teachers are, that I still needed another job. But
Yeah.
this idea that anyone who's well educated wouldn't be in these spaces, yet that same person had come to me and was asking questions about menopause and lubricant and was relying on me as an expert. I was like, how do you think I navigate knowledge acquisition to be able to help you
Right.
without having skills in that area?
Yeah. That is fascinating. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
probably, I mean, your typical traditional academic or researcher probably doesn't have to face these types of
Hmm.
conversations that you and academics and scholars like you do. So I think it's really important to talk about that
Hmm.
and kind of shed more light on it and realize that there's so much importance in the work that you are doing that
Hmm.
you have articulated so well in this interview alone, just to that simple connection of like knowledge and meeting people where they need it and kind
Yeah.
of that space in which that can happen. So that is truly fascinating. I know you're at an exciting and likely stressful time in your academic journey as you are, you know, getting ready to defend, finishing up edits for your dissertation. But do you see yourself continuing to build bridges between these two fields, or is there like a dream project that you would love to take on next? Kind of looking a little bit ahead, like your dissertation's
Yeah.
done, you've defended, now your PhD, like, or even, slightly before that, like, is there, like, do you want to continue kind of bridging this gap between these two areas, or is there like a dream project in one or both of the areas that you see yourself exploring a bit more?
Yeah, being in education in 2025, it's a little difficult to think about what the future is going on the job market.
Yes.
So I have plans and both not plans. I'm very lucky to be at a large university where I know I have job security because I work full time. This isn't attached to an assistantship or anything.
Yeah.
Um, but I think because of the transfer between what I see in writing studies and sex education, I am pulling more of my sex education work into writing studies through publications or presentations. Like I'm taking Adrienne Marie Brown's pleasure activism and applying it
Mhm.
to the Writing Center for a presentation I'm doing. I really want to do something with the principles of BDSM and how those are actually models for starting Writing Center sessions. So taking the kind of I think what some academics like to do, where they take this playful, sexy approach to things, but I also want to emphasize some of the seriousness that is there. And I think there's always bridges the other way around. That as an academic and an expert in this, how can I support other initiatives? And there's not much in the way of that in my area besides SARC, which is our Sexual Assault Resource Center. But once I have time, with this gap of where my dissertation was, I'd
Yeah.
really like to find ways to volunteer my time in spaces that might benefit from this, whether that's helping people with arguing for policies or placement or hosting some workshops as someone who knows about some of these topics. But trying to find ways that I can get out of academia, because if there's with my resources for sexual health, because if there's one thing I've noticed, there is a lot of publication about sex education and what needs to be done, and it hasn't been happening for years. So
Yeah.
just continuing to talk about it and, preaching to the choir in the echo chamber isn't going to help. I want to figure out how I can go out and do something with the people that really need this.
Oh, I
But
love that. Yeah.
what that is, I'm not sure yet because the
Yeah,
environment's changing all the time.
so true.
So,
It's very true, but that is exciting, and I think that's such a good approach because
mhm.
we do. I think we're really good at talking about a variety of different ideas and researching them and getting work published, but then like who's going out and doing that work?
Yeah.
And we have the power to do that with the knowledge that we have and the resources that we have. I think you're right, like taking advantage of that and kind of using those tools to benefit other spaces is such a good approach and such a good path. So that's super
Mhm.
exciting. Um, if someone listening is feeling stuck, either in writing or in learning about their own sexuality, what's a message you'd want to leave them with?
So it sounds cheesy, but talk to someone about what's making you feel stuck. And that doesn't have to be face to face with someone.
Yeah,
I, for one, love Reddit. It is anonymous. You can throw your question out there.
yeah,
And I believe there's so many people on this earth, there are no more original thoughts. Someone else is going through what you're going through and can tell you their experience. Someone else can go, I'm also experiencing this. And sometimes just knowing someone else out there is thinking the same thing is helpful. Um, and I always start with Reddit because a lot of us, like I said, don't have these informational literacy tools, but we know
yeah,
these common sites for contacting other people. So even if you can't, go to your roommate and say, I don't know why I can't get it up whenever I'm with my girlfriend, you can at
yeah,
least tell the internet and someone will usually respond. But yeah, I'm a big fan of, with communication, with relating to others, finding this way to get what's worrying you out there. Also coming from an idea of how to ease anxiety. A lot of times once we talk through what is making us anxious or what is making us feel stuck, we realize it isn't as big once we put it into words. Whenever
yeah,
I'm feeling stuck with writing my dissertation, I'll write to myself to because I'm good at generating writing. I know not everyone is. And I'll write to myself about it. And eventually I get to the point where I'm like, you're doing that thing where you're making it feel like it has to be your magnum opus. Just, start writing. And I'm like, yeah, I was letting it float in my head. And now that I put it into words, it's easier to get out of
yeah.
that headspace.
Absolutely. I don't think, I mean, it's not cheesy. Talking to someone
Yeah.
is helpful. We hear it a lot. So it's like, oh, I know
Yeah.
everybody says this, but it is actually so helpful. And I think you're so right. You're likely to find somebody who's going through the
Hmm.
exact same thing as you. Like I was totally late to the party and reading The Subtle Art of Not Giving a so I like just finished it within the last year. But one of
Yeah.
the things that totally resonated with me in that book is like as he's very blunt, but like puts it like you are not special. So everything you're going through, things that you're feeling, things that you are having a tough time with or feeling stuck with, like likely somebody else is going through it as well. And kind of seeking out spaces, whether it is on the internet or whether it is face to face or writing to somebody or talking to somebody on the phone, kind of just talking out loud and sharing thoughts in a safe or maybe anonymous space can absolutely be helpful and connect you with people who are like, oh, I just went through this, or oh,
Yeah.
I've been having those same feelings as well. Like, this is what's helped me. So I think that's an excellent message to kind of wrap things up with and kind of remind
Yeah.
people that there is beauty in that and there is such support and helpfulness in that. So, very well said and well articulated, like so much of what you have said today. Um, I really appreciate you being here and talking about your fascinating and important work and kind of everything you're doing. I am wishing you the best of luck on the remaining part of your academic journey and finishing
Thank
up your
you.
dissertation and getting that. The light is at the end of the tunnel. But just in case folks want to connect with you in terms of like asking about your work or asking questions, is there a place where they can contact or reach out to you?
Yeah, I should probably work on that, like a website or something, but really I'm on LinkedIn and I
That's fine.
I pop up for Texas A&M if people
Okay.
search me and my email's on my bio pages. But I'm not really on any kind of social media stuff. I appreciate people like you who take the time to cultivate these spaces for people to talk about this. So I don't have to go out and reinvent the wheel and put something together, but just LinkedIn, shoot me a message of why you're friending me, or just send me an email and be like, that sounds cool. Or,
Yeah.
hey, can I get a copy of this paper? And I'll reach back out.
That sounds great. Nope, LinkedIn's great. LinkedIn's perfect. That works for me. But yes, thank you so much, Macy, for being here. I really appreciate it. We will have to talk soon, kind of more about like what you do post dissertation
Yeah.
and kind of the amazing work that you end up doing. But thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you as well.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of Cultivate Talk. A huge thank you to Macy Dunklin for sharing their insight, their research, and their honesty about what it means to do work that pushes against stigma and builds spaces for learning and care. I hope this conversation reminded you that education, whether it's about writing, communication, or sexuality, isn't just about information. It's about connection, confidence, and community. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to follow Cultivate Talk wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss what's next. And as always, thank you for being a part of the conversation. Until next time, keep cultivating curiosity and conversations that matter.